God is breathing through you through a process that began before the personality could claim it. A second before air touched your nostrils, it belonged to the room. This body receives it and gives it back. You can influence the rhythm, while deeper body intelligence keeps the exchange moving. I'll show why that meeting of surrender and influence makes breath one of the cleanest places to feel the divine in ordinary life. Start with a physical fact, because it is already strange enough the air arrives from a world that existed before your name. It crosses into a body whose deeper design arrived before conscious choice. The respiratory system adjusts itself as the body sleeps, speaks, moves, and meets changing chemical and emotional demand. Conscious choice can enter the process, but conscious choice enters late. Life is already happening. That is the first payoff. Breath feels private because it is intimate, yet its intimacy happens inside relationship. That distinction, intimacy versus ownership, is where the pressure really begins. Chest movement, throat pressure, or the way grief changes rhythm, all happen so close to the center of experience that the mind adds a claim, mine. Yet the event itself keeps pointing outward. The world reaches this body, the body answers in its own way, and what it releases returns to the world. That is what I mean when I say God is breathing through you. I am speaking from our non-dual view of God as ultimate reality, the living field in which the physical world and conscious experience arise together. I am giving a spiritual reading of a physical relationship, and I want the levels kept clean. Air remains physical, respiration remains bodily. The old traditions use life force language for another layer. God points to the source and field that makes every layer possible. So, feel Him begins here, before any vision, before any dramatic state, before any inner light. Notice what the title is actually claiming. Life reaches you before your opinion about life does. The body enters relationship with the world before the personality gets to narrate the relationship. That is deeper than a breathing trick. It means one of the most constant experiences in your life has been quietly teaching you that the separate self depends on relationship at every moment. The older breath lesson on this channel used stillness at the bottom of an exhale to expose the gap between awareness and bodily process. Here the pressure runs in the opposite direction. The body can keep moving through ordinary life, and the teaching still has to hold. God has to survive the ordinary pressure of a human day, the traffic, the grief, the work, the laughter, and the breath you barely noticed 5 seconds ago. The reason breath is such a powerful teacher is that it sits on a seam you can actually feel. Heartbeat and digestion can shift with stress and attention, yet breathing gives a much more obvious meeting place between automatic regulation and conscious participation. Speech reorganizes the rhythm around a sentence, laughter breaks it into bursts, and a flight of stairs makes the body increase demand before any philosophy arrives. Once the person sits down afterward, the deeper system keeps working beneath the stream of thought. Underneath that ordinary experience, the body is monitoring chemistry long before conscious thought arrives. Carbon dioxide and acidity shift, receptors carry that information into the brainstem, and respiratory networks adjust the drive to breathe. Oxygen belongs in the picture as well, especially when levels fall enough to demand attention, while ordinary respiratory drive is strongly tied to carbon dioxide chemistry. The title gets stronger when the body is treated as living intelligence rather than mystical decoration. Think about what that means. You can have an opinion about needing another breath. The body has already been measuring conditions before the opinion forms. The conscious mind receives the alarm after a larger system has been working. In that sense, breathing exposes a strange hierarchy inside the person you call me. The narrator is important, but silent processes underneath it are already responding when the balance shifts. That body intelligence becomes even more interesting when emotion enters. A difficult name appears on your phone, and the breath can change before you answer. You walk into a hospital corridor, and the body may tighten before the mind has assembled the memory of why that smell and lighting feel familiar. Somebody raises their voice, and an old rhythm returns from years ago. A room can be objectively safe while the system prepares for a danger that once belonged somewhere else. The air itself arrived free of your biography. The breathing pattern can already be carrying biography. That distinction fixes one of the easiest confusions in spiritual language. Air is coming from the shared world. Breathing is the body's living response to that world. The response carries the history of this specific organism. Conditioning and memory are in the room, along with the body's present health and emotional state. When you feel the breath, you are feeling contact between something shared and something deeply particular. This is where respiratory interoception becomes useful. The brain is continually receiving information from inside the body, and breathing is one of the streams you can sometimes sense with unusual clarity. Expansion under the ribs, pressure in the throat, a chest that holds after a cutting sentence, or the long sigh that comes when a hard meeting finally ends, can all enter awareness as body information. Their theological meaning arrives later. If this distinction between air and the body's conditioned breathing changed how you hear the title, like the video. And brother, that is exactly why Feel Him has to be handled with maturity. Warmth in the chest, a wave of ease, or a sudden widening of inner space can become deeply meaningful because the body is participating in the recognition. Let the sensation carry its full beauty while keeping its level clear. The sacred reading grows from what the experience discloses about relationship with life, and ultimate reality is vast enough for bodily truth and spiritual meaning to stand together. The deeper recognition comes from the relationship underneath the sensation. The world is entering this body continuously. The body gives that contact a particular feeling through its present condition and history, and awareness can know the whole exchange while it unfolds. Once those three layers are seen together, the fantasy of a tiny commander sitting behind the eyes starts to loosen on its own. Imagine a man in his late 40s climbing the same office stairs he has used for 15 years. Halfway up, his breathing asks for a slower pace than the identity in his head expects. Irritation appears first, then a quieter recognition. Time has been moving through this body, while his self-image kept consulting an older photograph. He remains himself, yet the instrument carrying that identity has changed. That small moment on the stairs can teach surrender more cleanly than a grand speech. The body gives a fact and the personality immediately feels the urge to argue with it. Yet awareness can receive the change as information rather than humiliation. Capacity has seasons, care belongs inside wisdom, and dignity survives adjustment. The divine is present in the real body that ages, recovers, adapts, and keeps carrying the life of the soul through changing conditions. Now take the same principle into emotional life. You are in a conversation and the chest hardens. The old impulse is to treat that body state as proof that the other person is wrong, dangerous, disrespectful, or impossible. Another possibility opens when you recognize the sensation as real while remembering that its history may be older than the person standing in front of you. Awareness gives you enough room to find out which part belongs to now. Here, breath becomes practical through observation rather than a guided exercise. Ordinary breathing already displays the relationship between body and moment. Present physical demand can shape the pattern. Old memory can shape it too, and the two can overlap until the distinction is hard to see. Discernment means learning what belongs to the room, what belongs to the body's history, and what story the mind is building around both. God breathing through you includes physiology fully. It makes physiology more interesting. The same ultimate reality that gives us mystical language also appears as chemistry, tissue, nerve, memory, and environment. The body becomes sacred precisely because it is real enough to have limits. And once that is clear, we can move into the source tradition that takes the image of breath far beyond the lungs and uses it to explain why existence itself feels like something being spoken. One nuance belongs here before the Sufi source enters. Yogic prana reaches beyond the air moving through the lungs. Breath is one of the clearest bodily expressions through which that broader life force language becomes tangible. Physical respiration, energetic interpretation, and ultimate reality therefore occupy different levels of the same discussion. Oxygen participates in cellular respiration, the breathing body manages exchange, prana names a traditional energetic account of vitality, and God in our house language names the ground in which every level appears. Keeping their jobs clear gives the mystical claim more strength, because the body never has to be distorted to make the spiritual point. The source I want here is Ibn Arabi, because his image gives this title a depth beyond physiology. In his cosmology, creation is pictured through what he calls the breath of the All-Merciful. Human speech gives the analogy. Breath leaves the chest, passes through the throat and mouth, and becomes articulated sound. One invisible current can take many forms as words. Ibn Arabi uses that basic fact of speech to imagine the universe itself as divine articulation, existence continually receiving form within the breath of the merciful. Stay with the meaning beneath the terminology. Ibn Arabi's image treats creation like an utterance that keeps receiving form. An inexhaustible source expresses, finite forms appear, and each form changes while the giving continues. That places God is breathing through you inside a much larger frame. Your respiratory cycle becomes one intimate local event inside a reality whose deeper character is continual expression rather than a finished object sitting apart from its source. This is also where mercy becomes more interesting than sentiment. Mercy in this image is the generosity of existence itself. Finite forms are given room to appear, live, learn, love, fail, and recognize. The image carries weight even when life hurts terribly, because mercy here refers to manifestation itself, the overflowing that gives a temporary being a place inside the real. Ibn Arabi also gives us an idea that changes the meaning of time here. Creation is renewed from instant to instant. The world you are meeting now arrives under conditions that have already shifted from one instant ago. Conditions continue, memory gives continuity, patterns repeat, yet reality keeps presenting itself through fresh disclosure. That is where breath becomes a nearly perfect bodily symbol. Each cycle resembles the last while arriving under new conditions. You know this already from experience. The breath you took before terrible news belonged to one world, and the breath after the sentence landed belonged to another, even though the lungs, chair, and room were unchanged. Someone says a death has happened, a test came back clear, a relationship is ending, or a home has finally been secured, and the next cycle enters a world carrying a different meaning. The atmosphere stays chemically ordinary, while lived reality changes around the person breathing it. Continuity can fool the mind because familiar rooms and familiar rhythms make repetition feel exact. The deeper view sees renewal occurring inside the familiarity. Every respiratory cycle meets a body whose chemistry, attention, memory, and surroundings have shifted since the cycle before it. The rhythm can resemble itself closely, while the lived moment remains irretrievable, which is why a familiar breath can suddenly feel different after one sentence changes your whole world. Bring that into identity and the pressure becomes personal. The ego survives through a continuous story, and that story is useful because it carries promises, relationships, work, memory, and consequence across time. Trouble begins when yesterday's story outranks the living conditions in front of you. A wound from 40 years ago can enter a fresh conversation as if the old room still surrounds you, while a success from 10 years ago can keep demanding that a changing body perform an outdated version of strength. Breath quietly challenges that prison because the organism has to meet the present again. Yesterday can shape posture, chemistry, expectation, and fear, while the actual exchange still occurs under today's conditions. The source image adds another layer. Reality discloses itself again as the body receives again. Renewal is therefore happening inside continuity rather than somewhere outside it. This brings feel him closer to the body. Recognition begins with what is already occurring. Existence is arriving as an immediate event. This changing body is participating in it, and awareness can know the participation while it happens. Even the thought, "I have been this person for 50 years," is appearing in the present through a living system that has changed across every one of those years. The identity feels continuous while the conditions carrying it keep moving. There is something very humbling about that. A man may spend decades protecting a reputation. Then age begins removing the props in ways that arrive gradually enough to deny and clearly enough to feel. Work stops defining him the same way. His children need a different version of him. His father's face begins appearing in the mirror, and recovery asks for more patience. Suddenly, a question that sounded philosophical at 30 becomes physical at 55. What in me can change this much and still feel like me? Breath offers a powerful clue rather than a complete metaphysical proof. Identity is sitting inside a process of continual renewal, while awareness has a different quality from the conditions being watched. In the LOT worldview, you are the soul moving through this body. The body is the laboratory of the lifetime. Personality is one working interface, and ultimate reality is the ground in which the whole arrangement appears. That language lets us keep reverence and precision together. The body carries the respiratory process. The soul language names the conscious being learning through the body. God language names the source that exceeds both the temporary body and the private story. Breath becomes a meeting place because one ordinary cycle touches all three levels at once: bodily regulation, conscious experience, and the mystery of being here at all. And once you hear Ibn Arabi's image of divine breath becoming articulated creation, another part of the title begins to open. Human breath does something similar on a smaller scale. It leaves the body and takes form as speech. The invisible becomes audible. A private interior becomes public enough to enter another person's nervous system. The old Sufi image gives us the cosmic pattern. An ordinary conversation gives us the human version. The deepest surprise is that your outgoing breath can carry far more consequence than chemistry alone suggests. It can carry a sentence that changes a marriage, a confession that breaks a family pattern, a lie that hardens a child for years, a prayer that reorganizes your own attention, or a word of courage somebody remembers after you are gone. The current arrives through a field larger than you. What leaves your mouth has been shaped by you. That is where responsibility enters, but the order has to stay clean. Gift comes first. The body was already breathing before you spoke the first wise word or learned the first prayer, and life had already arrived before identity hardened around success, wounds, religion, skepticism, or discipline. That order protects humility. You receive first. Character begins shaping the return afterward. Imagine a man sitting in his car outside a small apartment building at dusk. He is 52. His younger brother lives upstairs. They have spoken only at funerals and family emergencies for nearly 11 years. The original fight was about money, but money stopped being the real issue a long time ago. Pride learned how to use the old event as a permanent border. He has driven 40 minutes to get here and spent another 6 minutes in the parked car. The scene remains completely ordinary. The dashboard is dark. A plastic bag with groceries sits on the passenger seat. Because arriving empty-handed felt wrong, his right hand keeps reaching toward the door handle and then resting back on his thigh. His breathing is already inside the story. The air comes from the same evening atmosphere that is touching pedestrians on the sidewalk and moving through an open window above him. Yet the pattern inside his chest belongs to this body, this history, this anticipation. The inhale catches slightly high. The exhale shortens when he imagines the first sentence. His jaw sets because years of rehearsal have trained the body for an argument before the brother has even answered. This is the distinction from earlier. The air arrives free of biography. The breathing pattern can carry biography before one word is spoken. He finally gets out, takes the groceries, climbs the stairs, and knocks. His brother opens the door and says his name in a flat voice. For half a second, the older man feels everything he came to say disappear. The body wants a familiar route: make a joke, pretend the visit is casual, blame their mother for insisting, turn tenderness into sarcasm before tenderness can expose him. Then something cleaner appears. He says, "I got tired of rehearsing this conversation in my head." That sentence rides outgoing air. It is a physical event before it becomes a psychological one. Respiratory pressure becomes voiced sound through the larynx. Then the mouth gives that sound enough shape to cross the room as language. His brother hears it, and the meaning arrives inside another body, carrying its own 11 years of history. Speech makes the voluntary side of breathing especially visible. Resting respiration can run quietly in the background, while speaking asks the system to organize outgoing air across a phrase. The inhale tends to become preparation. The exhale becomes controlled support for sound. That is why emotion can show up in voice before the speaker explains the emotion. A frightened sentence may arrive clipped. Grief can fracture a phrase, and relief can change the timing after the words are already over. The breath is carrying physiology into language, and language is carrying inner condition into relationship. This is the part I want you to really get. One person's exhale can cross a room as meaning and become part of another person's bodily state, expectation, and memory. Context decides a great deal, so the claim stays grounded. Speech enters relationship. The listener interprets it through a living history of their own, and the exchange can alter what becomes possible between them later. The breath has already traveled far beyond the lungs by the time consequence appears. The brother looks away and asks, "Why now?" The older man feels the old escape routes immediately. Make the visit sound casual, hide behind the grocery bag, shift responsibility onto the family member who encouraged him to come. He recognizes the movement and chooses the harder sentence instead. Their father has been getting weaker, and he had started imagining another funeral as the next time the two of them would stand in the same room. Now the breath and the title meet in a place far beyond relaxation. He is receiving life through a body that has limited time. He is using that life to shape a sentence. The sentence changes what becomes possible between two people. Divine intimacy becomes ethical because participation always enters consequence. This is why I keep taking breath beyond the wellness lane. The same outgoing current can carry evasion in one moment and honesty in the next, because the person shaping it may be holding fear, pride, affection, and clarity in one tangled interior. Human speech often comes from that mixture. The spiritually important shift happens when enough awareness enters the mixture for an imperfect sentence to become true enough to open a door. 11 years exceed what one evening can repair, and the limitation keeps the scene honest. An instant reconciliation would turn the encounter into spiritual fantasy. Anger returns. Old details resurface. The younger brother remembers an insult the older one barely remembers saying, while the older brother carries a memory of sacrifice that still feels unrecognized. Their histories refuse to line up neatly, yet the conversation has entered present time instead of remaining a private argument rehearsed in two separate heads. Present time gives the breath its usefulness again. Memory can pull the body toward an old year, and anticipation can throw it toward a future disaster, while respiration continues under the conditions of this moment. The old conditioning may still be felt strongly. Awareness can recognize its age and reduce the authority it receives. The feeling survives the recognition, but it loses the right to impersonate the whole truth of the room. Later, heat rises through the older man's face when his brother accuses him of disappearing during a hard year. Defense reaches the throat quickly, but the accusation contains enough truth to interrupt the old performance. He lets the sentence finish, hears the part that belongs to him, and answers that part first. Spiritual maturity has entered ordinary clothing, a charged body, an unfinished history, and a cleaner response appearing before pride gets to run the whole conversation. The kitchen stays ordinary, and that ordinariness makes the evidence cleaner. A body that once converted vulnerability into attack now has enough awareness and character to let another response form. Breath carries that response through the throat and into the room, but the deeper change happened in the person who became capable of shaping the outgoing air differently. That difference protects us from breath worship. Breath carries what the person makes available. Confusion can ride the same physical capacity as clarity, and the cleaner inner order can use the same lungs and throat to produce a very different consequence. The sacred quality lies in the whole relationship between source, instrument, awareness, and response. Now take one more step. The air that carried the brother's words disperses quickly, while the conversation can remain active in memory for years. Tomorrow, the younger brother may wake remembering that the visit finally happened. The older one may remember a look on his brother's face and feel the weight of an old choice in a way he had refused before. The physical breath disappears and the relational consequence keeps moving. Karma becomes very grounded here because speech is action and action leaves residue. Repeated phrases teach a relationship what to expect. Over years, a family can carry one sentence forward almost like inherited furniture, until a child grows up and hears the same wording come through their own mouth in another house. Breath becomes one physical carrier for that continuity, while awareness gives the next generation a chance to recognize what has been traveling through the family and shape the return differently. The spiritual question sharpens here, because life keeps arriving through conditions larger than personal authorship. Once that becomes clear, holiness has to move out of private feeling and into participation. The force reaching your hands, mouth, attention, and choices becomes something you answer for through use. Divine intimacy gains weight when it changes the quality of what a person returns to the world. The brothers sit for another hour. When the older one leaves, the relationship is still complicated. He carries the empty grocery bag down the stairs. His breathing has changed again, partly from the stairs, partly from relief, partly from exhaustion. The body keeps mixing physiology and meaning the way bodies do. And that is exactly the point. God contact in this teaching enters the mess and gives it nowhere to hide. Ultimate reality includes the stairwell, the old anger, the body chemistry, the truthful sentence, the unfinished relationship, and the quiet fact that both brothers received another evening in which a different future became possible. Now we can expose the hidden bargain behind a title like this. The mind hears, "God is breathing through you," and immediately imagines a special event it should be able to produce. The imagination reaches for a dramatic certificate, bliss in the chest, an electric inhale, a supernatural silence, some unmistakable respiratory event that lets the personality declare, "There, God showed up." That desire is understandable. It also carries an old assumption inside it. Ordinary life is separate from God until a dramatic sensation proves otherwise. The deeper, non-dual pressure goes the other direction. Breath has been happening inside ultimate reality the entire time. It belongs equally to the peaceful morning and the anxious night, to prayer and argument, to the hospital corridor and the boring Tuesday meeting. The field was already whole before the personality produced a sacred mood. You were looking for God to enter the breath. The whole exchange was already inside God. That changes feel Him completely. Divine contact becomes recognition of the field before it becomes a search for sensation. A breath can carry no dramatic feeling at all and still display dependence, renewal, relationship, and awareness. The teaching survives the ordinary cycle because the sacred claim rests in the relationship itself rather than in the intensity of one bodily state. Here, the older exhale teaching and the present one meet from opposite directions. The older teaching used the momentary absence of ordinary breathing to loosen identification. The quiet gap made awareness obvious because one familiar body process had paused. This teaching keeps the process moving and shows awareness, world, and personality changing inside a field that remains present through the motion. Stillness showed one door. Continuity shows another. The hidden bargain gets even sharper when control enters. Breath sits close enough to voluntary control that the ego can begin treating spiritual influence as ownership. A person learns to change respiratory rhythm, produces calm or intensity, and then quietly concludes that command over state means command over reality. That is where a useful capacity can begin feeding spiritual identity. The body gives a clean correction to the hunger for absolute control. Voluntary influence enters a living system whose deeper regulation keeps adapting as chemistry, activity, age, emotion, and environment change. Participation already carries enormous dignity because the soul can learn, choose, speak, love, and respond inside those conditions. The demand for total sovereignty is the ego trying to turn sacred participation into ownership. This pattern appears far beyond breathing. A gift can become a reason for rank if attention starts feeding identity. One successful act of healing can inflate into universal authority. Even a teacher who creates a genuinely calm room can begin treating atmosphere as proof of every claim. Power becomes dangerous when an effect is mistaken for the source. Breath gives a cleaner scale, influence is real, dependence is real, and the source remains larger than the person participating. That scale also changes prayer. Imagine prayer as a message sent upward from a sealed individual toward a distant God, and every silence feels like distance. Place the same prayer inside a non-dual field, and the whole event becomes intimate. Longing, breath, fear, surrender, and whatever answer or change eventually appears are all unfolding within ultimate reality. Prayer becomes relationship happening inside God rather than communication trying to cross a metaphysical gap. That is a far more intimate view of prayer, and it asks more of the one praying. Body, intention, attention, and the life that follows the prayer all become part of devotion. Sacred sound gains weight when ordinary conduct starts organizing around what the mouth keeps calling holy, because prayer then becomes a way of inhabiting the field rather than a private emotional performance. Breath gives prayer a physical carrier. Spoken devotion rides respiratory pressure through chest and throat, and the emotional condition of the person changes the timing, tone, and texture of the sound before any listener begins interpreting the words. Fear can tighten the delivery, grief can fracture it, and love can soften the whole phrase. The body keeps devotion embodied, which means prayer always carries more than vocabulary. Here, the title cuts through dogma by returning contact to lived experience rather than staging a fight with religion. A distant God can become an idea managed by institutions. Ultimate reality presses directly against the body. This cycle has to occur inside the life you are actually living, and awareness has to become present there. Teachers, traditions, and scriptures can point with enormous value, but the contact itself becomes real only as lived experience. Private feeling still earns authority through discernment. Direct contact and private infallibility are very different things. The more intimate the divine becomes, the more discernment you need, because the ego loves borrowing sacred language for its own conclusions. A man feels a sudden peace after making a decision and says, "God confirmed it." The peace may reflect alignment, simple relief after a decision, a nervous system settling as uncertainty ends, or several layers arriving together. The honest response honors the peace while keeping the interpretation open. That is mature mysticism. Experience can be deep before explanation becomes final. Breath trains humility because respiratory sensation can become extraordinarily persuasive. A shift in rhythm can change the felt sense of the whole body and participate in larger patterns of attention and neural activity. A powerful breath-related state can therefore be completely genuine as experience. Spiritual meaning begins when context, character, time, and discernment examine what the experience actually opened. The spiritual successor grows up right there. The old lesson asked you to recognize the divine in a gap. This one asks you to recognize the divine while the whole human situation remains present, with the body carrying memory and personality, while awareness still has to choose inside uncertainty. If your guard disappears the moment physiology becomes complicated, your guard was too small. Ultimate reality is large enough to hold the carbon dioxide signal. Beside the prayer, the old fear pattern beside awareness of that pattern, and a tired body beside the soul learning through fatigue. Keeping the whole field intact removes the pressure to choose between physiology and God. The layers can remain distinct while belonging to one reality. Once the whole field comes into view, the hunt for a perfect spiritual state begins to relax. Connection already exists as the condition under which breathing can occur. World reaches body, body reports itself into awareness, and both remain held inside a reality larger than either description. The desired mystical proof was sitting underneath the search as ordinary dependence all along. If you want this channel to keep separating powerful spiritual experience from spiritual inflation, comment the word discernment. Spiritual intensity creates the harder test because breath can genuinely alter the texture of experience. Calm may deepen, emotion may rise through the body, perception may widen, and the familiar personality can feel temporarily smaller than the field around it. Respect the event. Then use a test strong enough to keep intensity from turning into spiritual rank. Here, spiritual seriousness has to outrank excitement. Breathing is woven into physiology, arousal, attention, and the rhythms of the brain. Research has found respiratory timing coupled with neural activity involved in emotion, memory, and attention. That gives the mystical reading a firm bodily floor. Powerful state shifts can arise through an extraordinarily complex brain-body conversation, while physiology leaves the metaphysical question open. The experience can keep its sacred weight, and the established bodily layer can keep its precision. Imagine somebody leaving a powerful breathing session after several minutes in which bodily sensation became enormous and the usual boundary around the personality grew thin. They may come out convinced they touched God, and the event may remain one of the strongest experiences of their life. Give the awe its dignity. Then let time ask the harder question. What did that contact become once the nervous system returned to ordinary conditions? If the person returns to ordinary life, more able to face what they were avoiding, and the change shows up as steadier honesty and care, something useful has been integrated. If the person becomes obsessed with recreating the peak, starts treating intensity as rank, and begins dismissing ordinary responsibility as lower vibration, the state has found an ego ready to wear it. Breath makes the distinction between state and meaning unusually visible. Respiration can change the texture of a moment enough for the experience to become spiritually important, while interpretation remains the human act that gives the event a place in a worldview. Keeping those two layers close but distinct protects both the sacred experience and the person having it. This is where older spiritual traditions were often wiser than the modern hunger for experience. A serious lineage cared about what remained after the state faded, whether praise still controlled the student, whether power corrupted conduct, whether fear had lost some command, and whether other people found the person more trustworthy over time. The fruit had to survive the disappearance of the peak. The title, God is breathing through you, carries the same demand. Divine intimacy should deepen reality contact in a way that shows up as care for the body, respect for another person's dignity, and greater honesty about uncertainty. The ego loses one more excuse to turn sensation into a cosmic certificate. Think about a teacher whose voice settles a room almost immediately. His breath control is excellent. The timing feels spacious, and listeners may report warmth, calm, tears, or a strong sense of presence while he speaks. Those responses tell you something real about atmosphere, expectation, voice, and group attention. They leave the deeper question open. What kind of person is carrying that beautiful voice when the room stops admiring him? A beautiful voice and a settled room only show one layer of the teacher. The fuller picture appears later through money, consent, private conduct, treatment of frightened students, and the response to contradiction. Those pressures reveal dimensions of character that respiratory control and atmosphere leave unresolved. A voice can move the body before the intellect has enough information to judge the speaker. Steady pacing may regulate attention, and a soft tone may lower defenses, especially when sacred language gives ordinary claims a larger emotional frame. That is exactly why discernment belongs beside reverence. The body can receive the atmosphere fully while the conscious being still takes time to decide what deserves trust. The same principle applies inwardly. An inner command can arrive with tremendous force. The chest opens, breathing shifts, and the thought feels charged with certainty. A person can interpret that as divine instruction. Another layer of wisdom gives the claim time and consequence, allowing ordinary facts and trusted people to push against the interpretation until its strength becomes clearer. Certainty begins as an experience before it becomes authority. Breathing can make certainty feel embodied, which is exactly why this distinction belongs here. When the whole body shifts with a thought, the thought can feel more true. The shift may accompany a genuine insight, or it may reflect fear, relief, memory, desire, or several layers at once. Mature mysticism gives the experience room while leaving the claim open long enough for truth to show itself. This is where Feel Him receives another layer. Feeling the sacred presence of the field includes feeling this body inside it and recognizing how small one beautiful experience remains beside the vastness that contains it. The divine shrinks whenever an intense state is recruited to certify a personal story. And brother, one detail here is easy to miss. The ordinary breath after the peak may teach more than the peak itself. You return home to the same kitchen, obligations, relationships, and old emotional triggers. The powerful state now meets the structure of a life, and the useful question becomes whether the person can meet familiar pressure with a different quality of presence. A powerful state can temporarily rearrange perception. Integration asks whether the structure producing your ordinary choices has changed. The test arrives when intensity is gone. Mysticism stays larger than behavior, while behavior reveals whether realization reached ordinary life. It gives mysticism roots. The deepest traditions speak about transformation. because realization has to penetrate the places where identity keeps reconstructing itself. Breath can open a state. Awareness has to meet the person who returns from the state. Time exposes every false ownership claim eventually. The breath you can influence today will change as this body ages and carries the consequences of the life it has actually lived. A spiritual teaching reaches maturity when it still holds as bodily power changes. The deeper question asks what divine intimacy becomes when control decreases. Age changes athletic capacity and alters a singer's support. A person who spent decades carrying others may eventually discover the dignity of being carried as well. Breath has been preparing that question from the beginning, because every cycle already depends on receiving. There is a quiet arrogance hidden inside the word independence. It can be useful as a social goal. Pay your bills, make decisions, carry responsibility, while the body remains dependent in the absolute sense. It depends on a livable atmosphere and on countless forms of support that the organism receives from the world around it. Breathing makes that dependence impossible to romanticize away. For a younger person, dependence can sound like weakness because the body is still proving how much it can do. Age often changes the emotional meaning of the word. Strength begins to look less self-created when you remember who carried you before you could stand, who gave language to experience, who cooked or drove during hard seasons, and who forgave versions of you that no longer exist. The independent self was built inside relationship from the beginning. Breath is the body's continuous confession of that fact. A man in his 60s can remain strong, active, employed, and deeply responsible while beginning to notice that recovery asks more of him than it did 20 years earlier. He may resent the request because an old definition of strength still equates dignity with total self-sufficiency. When he finally hears that belief clearly, the spiritual knot becomes visible. The body is asking for wiser participation while the identity is defending an outdated contract with itself. Breath gives him another picture of strength. Living exchange has always included receiving. The body takes in what it needs, uses what it can, and returns something to the field. A mature human life can carry the same reciprocity. Giving can remain powerful, while receiving support loses its association with shame, and responsibility keeps the exchange from sliding into passivity. Strength becomes participation with enough humility to accept what the present season actually requires. This is where the title becomes tender. God breathing through you can mean that the divine reaches this life through support the personality never manufactured alone. A hand on the shoulder during grief, an adult child who has become strong enough to help, or skilled care offered with dignity, can suddenly expose how much life has always arrived through other forms. The field comes through relationship too. That realization repairs lonely spirituality at the root. Direct God contact can deepen the sacredness of relationship because the reality sought inwardly is also encountered through the person who brings water, listens at the right hour, drives when your strength is low, or simply stays. Receiving help can become reverence once pride stops treating dependence as contamination. Mortality enters here with reverence as the physical limit that gives the teaching its full weight. The body is mortal. Respiratory capacity belongs to a living organism with a beginning and an end. Every spiritual reading of breath has to respect that physical truth. We care for the body because this lifetime is being lived through it. The old temptation is to hear mortality as an insult. The deeper path can hear it as precision. Temporary life can be immeasurably precious precisely because a song, a conversation, or a season receives its shape partly from the fact that it ends. Endings can sharpen attention instead of erasing meaning. Breath gives impermanence a rhythm the body can understand directly. A cycle rises, changes, completes, and another begins. The body can do that thousands of times in a day, with each cycle passing as the next one arrives. Continuity is built from events that disappear. Connect this to identity, and the body offers a very different picture from the fixed object the personality calls me. Continuity is happening through constant change. Tissue renews, strength shifts, beliefs are revised. Relationships alter their demands, roles fall away, and memory itself changes texture across time. Breath keeps meeting the version that exists now, which makes the body a living argument for identity as continuity through transformation, rather than sameness frozen in place. You, as a soul moving through this body, are asked to recognize continuity at a deeper level than the costume. The title now approaches the threshold of death as a question of identity and surrender, rather than an exit fantasy. The question is simple and severe. If the process keeping this body breathing was always received, what exactly are you afraid of losing when the body reaches the end of its capacity? Fear can still arise here, alongside a fierce love of life and the grief that comes with losing what has become precious. The teaching changes the ownership claim rather than flattening those emotions. Life, body, time, and relationship were all received through conditions larger than the personality's manufacture. Gratitude for their arrival can begin sharing the same inner room with fear of their departure. That changes the emotional quality of aging. The body's changes can refine attention when spiritual identity stops arguing with the season. Energy at 60 carries a different assignment from energy at 30. Slower pace can sharpen timing, reduced appetite for noise can expose discernment, and the loss of an old role can uncover relationships that the role once concealed. Breath becomes a witness to season rather than a scoreboard of youth. Picture an older singer at a community rehearsal who spent decades carrying the strongest line in the room. Long phrases once came easily, and part of his identity grew around being the voice other singers could lean on. Now he has to breathe sooner than he remembers needing to. At first, the shorter phrase feels like public evidence of decline, and he hears every extra breath as a small failure. Then, one rehearsal, something changes. He releases the need to dominate the line, listens more closely to the singers beside him, and takes the breath his body actually needs. Another voice carries the phrase. For a moment he returns on the next line with less force and far more attention. The music improves. That image carries the deeper lesson of age, because strength is changing its relationship with the field. The singer still contributes real skill, yet the room now contributes more visibly to him, as other voices carry the phrase through the places where his breath ends sooner. His identity as the permanent carrier loosens, and communion becomes audible exactly where self-sufficiency once demanded the whole line. And now, feel him means something different again. Divine intimacy appears in the strength that gives and in the humility that receives. When the role changes, the field can remain recognizable through both sides of the exchange. This is where spiritual maturity becomes beautiful. You stop asking life to preserve every form you loved and learn to meet the source through changing forms. The body and relationships change together. Breath keeps adapting inside those changes, while ultimate reality remains larger than the form currently passing through it. Beautiful ideas stay cheap until power, authority, fear, and ordinary behavior force them to prove their shape. Here is the power test. If God is breathing through you becomes a reason to place yourself above another person, the teaching has turned backward. The title sounds personal because it addresses you directly, yet its implication opens outward. The same field making your lives around you, including people whose beliefs or behavior challenge your own. Mystical vocabulary leaves the divine unowned, and that realization makes spiritual rank much harder to maintain. Imagine somebody leaving a powerful retreat, convinced that God moved through their breath. For a while, the experience softens them. Then the story begins changing. Comparison creeps in. Intuition starts outranking evidence, and disagreement begins to feel like proof that another person is spiritually beneath them. A beautiful experience has become raw material for a dangerous identity. The power test arrives after the mystical material because contact has to be examined by what grows from it. First, honor the contact. Then, watch what the ego does with contact. A mature experience of divine breath produces accurate scale. Intimacy with the source gives your experience dignity, while the same source appearing through another being gives their freedom equal seriousness. Care for this body and respect for another body grow from the same realization. Your direct experience can carry real spiritual weight, and another person can still question your interpretation while remaining fully inside the sacred field you claim to recognize. That balance is one of the hardest spiritual achievements because the ego prefers two simpler positions. It can make itself tiny and outsource all authority, or it can inflate and treat private feeling as universal law. The path we are teaching asks for inner authority with humility. Breath gives the image perfectly. The air becomes intimate when it enters your body. It remains local inside a shared field. The same standard applies whenever a teacher, healer, or mystic uses God language around another person. Genuine depth can exist alongside extraordinary presence and years of disciplined practice. Yet realization still has to live beside consent, honest handling of money, clean boundaries, and the freedom of another soul to refuse what is being offered. Coercion exposes egoic authority wearing sacred language because divine intimacy can deepen influence while never turning another being into property. If the title ever begins feeling like special access that places you above another being, return to its simplest physical truth. The air came through a shared world and entered a body that depends on conditions larger than itself. Awareness is participating in something larger as well. That scale can burn arrogance cleanly because intimacy with the source proves relationship and gives zero proof of rank. The same test turns inward when fear or desire begins speaking with a sacred tone. A wanted outcome can charge the chest, alter the breath, and make one thought feel as if the whole universe leaned forward to confirm it. The charge can be completely real, while the conclusion still needs time and evidence. I want LOT viewers to become difficult to manipulate, even by their own spiritual excitement, because inner authority becomes stronger when reverence and self-examination can occupy the same body. Maturity here means openness joined to exactness. Cynicism closes the door before experience can teach, while credulity hands the keys to the first powerful feeling. A stronger posture can honor the force of an encounter, admit that presence was felt and something was learned, then give the interpretation enough time to prove its shape through reality. That combination of reverence and patience is strength. The same breath that carried the mystical feeling will later carry the sentence you speak to somebody who disagrees. That later sentence may tell you more about integration than the original state. This brings us back to the brothers in the apartment. The older brother could have used spirituality to avoid accountability. He could have said they were both souls, the past was illusion, forgiveness was necessary, and family karma needed release. Every sentence could sound elevated while functioning as escape. Instead, the spiritual work became specific enough to hear the brother's pain. That is the kind of non-duality I trust. Sacred reality and uncomfortable fact can occupy the same field with distinct consequences left intact instead of being erased by a slogan about oneness. Breath teaches the same principle physically. Shared air enters bodies that remain distinct, and each body carries its own regulation, history, consent, and consequence inside the common field. Unity therefore gains texture rather than erasing difference. That is what gives the title moral force. God can be intimate with every being, while each soul remains responsible for the form its participation takes. God breathing through you means the sacred is closer than the ego imagines. God breathing through everyone means the ego has less permission to build a throne from that intimacy. Another consequence follows from the same teaching. The atmosphere itself belongs inside the sacred picture. Air is a material condition of bodily life before it becomes a spiritual symbol, and actual respiratory conditions remain physical realities. Smoke, pollution, illness, and environmental damage can change breathing directly. Reverence for divine breath therefore widens naturally into reverence for the conditions that let bodies breathe. Scale is the final correction here. A spirituality that praises divine breath while ignoring the material conditions of breathing splits the sacred from the world again. Matter belongs inside the field, and the body belongs there with it. So God contact has to remain coherent when flesh, environment, and responsibility enter the room. That is one of the deepest LOT convictions. The world is a real expression of source, and the body is a real laboratory inside it. Spiritual depth becomes stronger when flesh and spirit are allowed to occupy one reality, and ordinary responsibility remains part of the same path. The power test can therefore be stated cleanly. A real insight should increase your ability to meet reality as it is. When the insight keeps demanding that reality bow to a private story, sacred language has been recruited to protect the story. The field is larger than the interpretation. By this point, feel him has become quieter than the phrase first sounded. Bring the title down to one clean recognition. Breath is intimate because it is relationship. The body receives from a world it depends on, shapes that arrival through its own condition, and gives something back while awareness can know the exchange. God, in the non-dual language of this channel, is the field holding the entire event. Shared atmosphere becoming intimate inside a body, memory meeting the present, and one living presence speaking to another. Even an ordinary breath can carry that recognition. Picture a room full of voices. The older singer from earlier is standing near the back of a community hall, hearing the opening notes of a song the group has sung for years. Halfway through a long phrase, his voice thins sooner than the memory of his younger body expects. So he takes the breath his present body asks for and listens as the line keeps moving through the singers around him. The break he once heard as failure has become a place where the room enters the music. The woman 2 chairs away catches the note as his voice releases it, and a younger man underneath her fills the chord until the older singer is ready to enter again. Somebody near the front drifts slightly flat and corrects by listening. For a few seconds, the older man hears the group continue through the space where he used to force himself to keep singing, and something in his chest finally relaxes. He returns to the phrase and lets his voice belong to the room. The source gives every voice room to exist through a shared atmosphere that passes through irreducibly individual bodies. One singer shapes a phrase and another receives its edge, then carries the sound farther. Communion grows from that overlap while difference remains intact. The field is larger than any single contribution and becomes audible only because distinct contributions keep meeting inside it. The singer looks around and realizes he spent decades taking pride in being the one others leaned on. Age has taught him another form of strength. He can receive the phrase from somebody else and return when his breath is ready. He can belong while releasing control of the whole sound. That realization contains more surrender than a dramatic spiritual state. If you want more full lectures that take one ordinary body process all the way into direct God contact, subscribe to the channel. Outside the hall, the evening keeps moving with complete indifference to the spiritual interpretation inside. Headlights slide across the windows, a restaurant door opens and closes across the street, and a child chases a ball past the entrance, while voices from the sidewalk rise and disappear into traffic. The same atmosphere is moving through all of it. Inside, the group takes the song again from the beginning. The older man takes his place in the sound. His chest rises. The breath arrives from the same room as everyone else's. It passes through a body shaped by decades of training and memory, then emerges as this particular human voice. For a few seconds, he hears the whole room more clearly than he hears himself. The room stays completely ordinary, which is exactly why the image can carry so much. Shared air enters distinct bodies, becomes distinct voices, and gathers into one field of sound, while every singer keeps a separate history, range, and responsibility. That is non-duality with texture. Communion can preserve individuality, intimacy can preserve boundaries, and surrender can deepen skill rather than erase it. The older singer hears the phrase continue and realizes that relief has replaced the old panic around control. Life was always shared enough to carry him. His work was to participate with skill, attention, and humility inside a source he never manufactured. The same breath that once felt like proof of personal strength now feels like entrance into communion. He takes the next line with less force than his younger body would have used, and hears more of the room because of it. Age has changed the voice, yet the song has become larger in his attention. The source exceeds his form while remaining intimate with the exact form available tonight. That is, feel him. The divine is intimate enough to move as your aliveness and vast enough to remain larger than the one who calls the breath mine. This body receives. You, as a soul, learn through the receiving. And the field keeps giving itself as this moment. The phrase reaches the end. Every voice releases the final sound into the same air it came from. The final note belongs to the room only for the moment it is sounding. The silence afterward belongs to all of them.